So apologies are in order for 1, not uploading anything in 2 weeks, and 2, not being done the End of the Death Volume 3 video. I swear to God it's working, my school schedule has been an absolute nightmare.
Done. Now let's see how it looks so far.
That being said, I do want to keep making videos for obvious reasons, so here's one I've wanted to make for a long while now, and it is characters in Warhammer that we desperately want back. Now, I didn't say top 10 characters because I don't know how many I'm going to get through in this list, especially considering the fact that I have a list of over 30 characters on my computer, so that's probably going to be more than enough for 2 videos. Okay, 2 editors updates. First off, this has turned into a top 10 list, I'm sorry, and secondly, it's turned into not just top 10 Space Marines we want back, but top 10 Space Marines from the Traitor Legions we want back. And after organizing my notes, I know, rare for me, there's a good chance I'll be able to get 3 videos out of this. That being Traitor Legion Marines we want back, Loyalist Marines we want back, and non-human characters we want back. So before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and without further ado, let's get into some characters that we want back in Warhammer 40,000. Now let me lay a few ground rules here. When I say want back, I don't mean expanded upon more in 30k, like, you know, more Horus Heresy content, as a lot of people want for characters like Shadrach Medusan. I mean returning to the mainline setting in 40k. You know, books like the Plague War stuff going on, and whatever's going on in the Eisenhorn books, and Watchers of the Throne or A Dawn of Fire, that sort of thing. You know, the mainline story. And furthermore, I know there are gaps between books, that's pretty obvious. So around 5 years or more without being featured in a novel is really what I'm considering here. And I should also preface, I'm talking about novels, as opposed to maybe campaign books or White Dwarf articles, because yeah, those do count, but a character appearing in the Arcs of Omen books is really not the same as featuring in a mainline novel. Though I am willing to break my own rules here and talk about a few exceptions. So with the diatribe out of the way, let's dive in. The first character on this list is Iskander Khayon, the former Thousand Sun sorcerer who became a founding member of the Black Legion. Now, he features as the main POV character in Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Black Legion books, that being Talon of Horus and the Black Legion, both of which are exceptional and are highly beloved in the community, and as such, Khayon is very well liked. Now, a lot of people don't care for him and believe he's a Mary Sue, which, you know what, that honestly kinda tracks. The dude basically has a Drukhari Scourge girlfriend and a demon that does his bidding and is well liked by everybody and is super powerful and yada 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 and keeps getting passes for his failure. You know, that's a long can of worms and I'm not gonna get into it, but the last we saw of him was in 2017 in the book Black Legion, wherein by the end of it, he's in the custody of the Inquisition with his eyes plucked out, extolling his memoirs essentially to an Inquisitor, and we learn it is right before the opening of the Great Rift. The reason he's in the custody of the Inquisition is because he willingly gave himself up, and people are just perplexed as to why he did that. And it turns out it's because Abaddon ordered it. Abaddon needs him there, sharing this story. That story he was telling being not just his personal memoirs, but the story of how the Black Legion came to be. That could be so interesting, but it hasn't gone anywhere in, what, nearly 7 years? And while it's true Bowden has been working on other things like Echoes of Eternity and who knows what else, it should be noted this is one storyline people desperately want picked up. Khayon is one of the most well-known characters in the community, and while he does make appearances in a short story written by Bowden that features the Night Lords, as well as Ahriman Unchanged, it's never really a mainline part, and we haven't gotten any extensions or inclusions in his story for a long time. Next up on the list is Lord Commander Eidolon, and I promise I'm not just doing Chaos Space Marines this episode. Quick editor's note, turns out, yes I am. Now, Eidolon is a very interesting one because, if I am to be believed, he was mentioned in the book Genefath, which just came out, and even then he just has a bit part, or he's like just mentioned. He isn't really back to the setting in force, and I really think he should be, because it's very heavily rumored we're going to be getting a model refresh for the Emperor's Children soon, and I think there would be no better person to lead a reforged Emperor's Children than Eidolon. Maybe not even Fulgrim himself, because again, it can't just be all about Demon Primarchs or else we're just in basically an extension of the Horus Heresy. We need Marine characters who can stand on their own and be leaders of men. Furthermore, Eidolon is very interesting because 1, he has really cool abilities, and 2, seeing him in action would mean the heralding of noise marines. People love noise marines and think they're so cool, but we very, very rarely ever get to see them in action doing their thing. Sure, we see Emperor's Children here and there, but very rarely are they cacophony noise marines. But those guys do follow Abaddon like dogs, so wherever he goes, they would go, and we could finally see them doing some real damage. There's also the fact that Eidolon is very interesting because he actually was there in the book Horus Rising. He has been with us since the very beginning of the heresy, so the seniority and perspective of this character cannot be overstated. He's also a real blast to listen to and read about in the books in the heresy, like The Path of Heaven. And furthermore, we're getting a Horus Heresy character book specifically about him, in the same vein as ones we got for Luther, First of the Fallen, or Constantine Valdor. The next one is Eidolon, the Auric Hammer. That's really interesting, and that's one I hope I can get my hands on. And in an interview, the author of the book stated that a lot of what he talks about in terms of Eidolon are his struggles, his doubts, his pursuit of perfection as a peerless warrior, ooh, a lot of P's there, contrasted with his compromisation as a disabled character because he was decapitated by Fulgrim in a fit of rage and then brought back to life. But the scars and pains of that do very much weigh on him and still cause problems. So we would get to see his pursuit of perfection coupled with his inherent disability, coupled with his having to lead members of the most raucous and ill-disciplined legion in all of Warhammer, coupled with his own descent into hedonism, something that is going to be covered in that Auric Hammer book, which takes place during the Heresy. And if that takes place during the Heresy, you can probably bet he's a lot more hedonistic now. Furthermore, now that Fabius Bile is back in the setting and not really affiliated with any one group, it would be interesting to see the two of them link up and compare and contrast ideas, whether or not the Legion is worth saving, their differing goals, how they might work together and reconcile, and so on, especially since Eidolon is rumored to be a lieutenant to Abaddon the Despoiler. I've been really going on and on about Eidolon here, but I think out of all the characters in this list, he's definitely one of, if not the one I am most eager to see come back to the setting in force. Next on the list is Kharn the Betrayer, and this one is pretty obvious because Kharn is one of the oldest and most well-liked characters in 40k. I believe one of his oldest stories is from 2001 even, specifically a short story called The Wrath of Kharn, which was collected in the Dark Imperium anthology, which is from 2001. So it's pretty clear Kharn is one of the oldest and most ubiquitous characters in all of Warhammer 40,000, so it's a real shame we haven't gotten anything from his point of view or with him as a main character for a long time. The last we heard of Kharn was during the Arcs of Omen campaign, which again, not a novel, wherein he was fighting alongside Angron after Angron reappeared and fought against the Imperial Indomitus fleet Quartus, ultimately unleashing the Murder Curse, which turned everyone in that entire Indomitus fleet, aside from the Custodes and Sisters of Silence, to Khorne. So, again, big things going on that front, but very little from Kharn. In terms of Kharn-centric content, the most recent thing we've gotten is from 2014, the book Kharn, Eater of Worlds, and him showing up at the end of the book Shroud of Night as an antagonist. But he really is a lot more than just some dumb monster to throw at protagonists to show, oh shit, things have really gotten bad. No. You see, Kharn was always one of the only people who was able to bring Angron to heel and get through to him, even when he was at his worst. So seeing him interact with the Demon Primarch now could be very interesting, especially considering how much time has passed and how much the two have both grown separately. To that effect, I was actually very disappointed that Kharn does not show up in the 2013 book, Angron the Red Angel, but there is one character who is in that book, Lotara Saren. Now, if you don't remember, Lotara Saren was the ship mistress of the Conqueror, the flagship of the entire World Eaters Legion. She was a tough-as-nails woman who commanded a lot of respect despite her young age, and even had a bloody red handprint on her uniform's chest that was given to her by Angron himself, because of how brutal she was as a commander and how effective she was at bringing the World Eaters Legion into line. People still make jokes about her. Now, what happened to her is that come end of the Heresy, her body would be fused with the Conqueror itself, and spectral images of her would be what leads the ship. And she's been having friction with various World Eaters captains because she doesn't really trust them too much, and they obviously don't trust this weird specter thing that runs their ship. But by the end of the book, Angron the Red Angel, her and a World Eater's captain come to an understanding, to the point where the World Eater's captain actually is capable of using the teleporter without being afraid she's just gonna mix him with the floor. So she's been getting her development, she's back in the setting in a mainline book, but we haven't gotten Kharn. And her and Kharn were very, very close, to the point where a lot of people would, well, ship them, and thought they would make a cute couple. Like, there's a lot of art of that. And again, you know, that's not a bad idea. It would be very interesting to see these two finally talk once again after like 10,000 years. How have things gone between them? Have they kept in touch? Are they in awe of each other, of what they both have become separately? It's so interesting and definitely something I would love to see, because those very deep personal connections between characters is something I feel modern 40k is kind of lacking as it becomes more and more Primarch-centric. Now, next up on the list, it shouldn't surprise you that basically every single character on this list is Heresy era. Now, they might not directly be from the horusheresy series, but they still are Heresy era, meaning, you know, they were active during the Great Crusade, and they were active during the Heresy, and yada yada yada. But there is one singular exception to that being the next character on the list, who is Honsou, the warsmith of the Iron Warriors, who in my mind is such a cool character that we have not heard hide or hair of in far too long. Specifically, this is the man behind the Demon Kolaba. You know, that thing. I'm sure you've probably seen a short or a full video. I shouldn't get too far into it. But the implications of the Demon Kolaba are very, very interesting, because it shows innovation within the Traitor legions. Disgusting and diabolical innovation, but innovation nonetheless. And furthermore, it shows that Honsou has a perspective that you really don't see in other legions. He's very concerned with building forces, provisioning, munitions, trying new things, and other Traitor Marines, especially veterans of the Long War, which he is not, are often more concerned with taking down the Imperium and fighting and honor and this and that. Honsou is a very dishonorable person. When Uriel Ventress challenges him to a direct face-to-face duel, he just straight up says no. Now, I should elaborate on Honsou not being a veteran of the Long War. He's actually a hybrid Marine, meaning his is a gene seed of both Iron Warriors and World Eaters' DNA. You see, what happened was, during the Horus Heresy, Fabius Bile stole the gene seed out of a living Iron Warrior named Honorable Solaka, but after a fire in Fabius Bile's lab, most of the gene seed he had saved up from stealing was lost, except one vial, and the name on the vial was partly obscured and scratched away, only leaving the name Honsou. Not only does that happen in the book Angel Exterminatus, it's the very last thing to happen, so that it has that grim ending music that plays at the end of an audiobook on Audible, so it's like dun dun dun! And honestly, I thought it was really cool. I kind of pogged out a little bit when I saw that. And he gets made into a Chaos Space Marine around M41 in the Eye of Terror. And as you can imagine, he gets a lot of shit from other Iron Warriors, because, you know, he's part Imperial Fist, and he's not a veteran of the Long War, and yada yada yada, boomer boomer boomer. But the thing is, he still earns his way through the ranks because he's that good. His skill, instincts, acumen, leadership, provisioning ability, as well as his general sanity, as opposed to some of the veterans of the Long War, earns him a very high-ranking position very quickly in the warband of the warsmith Barban Falk, so that when Falk actually becomes a demon prince of chaos and just dips out of the Legion, he gets to take over, because there's really no one else who's fit to take his place. And then he also confirms this by knocking out another Iron Warriors warsmith rival, a Chaos Dreadnought, who he kills. Like, he rips the guy's innards out of the Dreadnought chassis and just crushes it in his hand. He then starts the Demon Kolaba, and then develops an intense hatred of the Ultramarine Uriel Ventress, because Ventress sabotages the Demon Kolaba and destroys a lot of his facilities on the Iron Warriors planet of Medrengard in the Eye of Terror. And then Honsou ends up on the planet of Kalth of all places, wherein he actually has to come face to face with the Legion of the Damned. And he survives too. He survives this, and Ventress, and everything else, and has to hide out on the planet of Kalth, becoming effectively a boogeyman for them, the Beast of Kalth, who's wandering the tunnel cities and could bring down the planet, and then has to escape back to the Eye of Terror by stowing away aboard an Ultramarine's vessel. This guy is nuts, and he's still alive. Now, we haven't gotten any new content for him since 2012. Again, very long time, but he is the brainchild of Graham McNeil, who is still active as a Black Library writer. So hopefully, we get more of him. Especially considering the fact that Uriel Ventress is once again active in the galaxy. You know, he's mentioned in the Dark Imperium books that I've just recently started reading, and he's, you know, doing his own thing. He got another book about him. He's actually since crossed the Rubicon and is now a Primaris Marine, that sort of thing. So why not bring back his hated arch-nemesis, the Warsmith Honsou? Especially since 1, the Iron Warriors have not been doing a lot as of late, and 2, they might soon be doing big things, because it really seems like Perturabo is going to make an alliance with Vashtor. I think that would be so cool, especially since Honsou has a very interesting penchant for fun tinkering, we'll say. Furthermore, it should be noted that Honsou actually does not like Abaddon the Despoiler. As opposed to someone like Abaddon who is his lieutenant, Honsou goes his own way, and has actively mocked him before. When Moriana, Abaddon's personal soothsayer, goes to give Honsou advice, he scoffs and says, "Oh, you're the one who's been advising Abaddon? That's a great recommendation." It's just his impertinent attitude, his connection to Uriel Ventress, and the fact that he could help bring Iron Warriors back into the setting in force that makes me feel he would be a great addition to the current setting of 40k. Now, getting back to the old heads, the next character I would really like to see come back, and I think many people will agree with me, is Luther. Because he recently got a book, well, recently quote-unquote, about him titled Luther First of the Fallen. However, this and every other piece of material about him focuses on the heresy-era things, when he would betray the Lion and lead a chunk of the Dark Angel's Legion in rebellion against the Imperium, claiming secession for the planet Caliban. And hold your shock, but this wouldn't go well, because the Lion would return after the fall of the Emperor on the Siege of Terra, and then have to bombard the planet and fight Luther face to face. However, Luther would manage to wound him with a poisoned sword, and that's the reason the Lion was asleep. However, this would actually snap Luther back to his senses, and he would effectively surrender. He's been locked in the bottom of the rock ever since. However, with the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, he's vanished, and nobody knows where he is. It was rumored that he's raising an army of fallen. However, again, we've seen neither hide nor hair of him. But the big thing is, Lionel Johnson has returned to the setting, and furthermore, the ruins of Caliban have been reassembled into a planet called Wormwood that is being used by Vashtor to effectively tunnel through the webway. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, but I'm not going to get into it. However, again, Luther fought for the independence of Caliban, and now Caliban is not only gone, but this thing under the control of this being. And again, what's gonna happen when he comes face to face with the Lion? Because in the lore, Luther has stated that he will only recant before the Lion himself, and would often rantingly state that the Lion's return is soon at hand, that when he comes back he'll absolve the fallen. That's an old piece of lore, but it has seemingly come to pass. So what else is gonna come of it? It'd be really interesting to see where the Lion's story goes and how Luther fits into that. I'm really hoping GW doesn't just forget him, because on one hand, it's stated that he wants to recant before the Lion and be forgiven, but on the other hand, he's apparently assembling an army of the fallen. So what's gonna come of that? Where is it going? I'd really like to see what GW does with that, and again, seeing Luther 10,000 years later after all of this has happened would be so interesting. Next up on the list is Jago Sevatarian, otherwise known as Sevatar. Now, Sevatar was the first captain of the Night Lords, and when Conrad Kurz would sort of just descend into insanity, the effective leader of the Legion. He was an incredibly effective warrior, and someone the fandom is really hung up on, because, again, we have no idea what happened to him. When we last left him off, he was in jail, imprisoned by the Dark Angels, because Conrad Kurz was able to escape and wreak havoc, but he stayed locked up. However, he did briefly escape because he had made friends with a small astropathic girl who was being abused and beaten by the master of the astropathic choir named Altayani. I'm sure you know that whole spiel. And people have really liked him ever since then, because that's very interesting for a Space Marine, especially a Night Lord, to do. He had a keen sense of justice, and even though he did hate the Emperor, it's interesting to see what his motivations were like or how he would feel about the Legion now. Because again, if he didn't die on screen, he's not dead. He's just vanished from the narrative, and it really stems to wonder, what did the Dark Angels do with him? Now, most Night Lords presume him to be dead, but some believe he might be alive, and actually without him, a lot of the best of the Legion kind of just dissipated and went their separate ways because, according to some, no one could live up to the legacy of Sevatar. But if he came back, the Dark Angels could, again, actually do something with their time and become a cohesive force. I would say Sevatar in this regard falls into a similar slot as Kharn, wherein it's not just so much the character, it's also what he could do for his legion and what he could bring about in the setting. And it's also because the fandom really likes this character, but he really seems to have gotten the short end of the stick in terms of the official narrative. Now, the Night Lords in general have gotten this treatment. You know, when people talk about Night Lords characters, they often talk about Talos and the other characters that come up in Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Night Lords trilogy. And that's very interesting, especially since the last we heard of them, they were about to go up against Craftworld Ulthwé. You know, you can bring back some Eldar action there. But those books are 10 years out of date. The last one was released in 2012. Not even 10 years, almost 12 years at this point. So while yes, it would also be cool to get him back, I feel like Sevatar might bring more weight to the setting, and is someone people have just wondered about more, because his plotline is left directly unresolved. Him just sitting in jail aboard the Dark Angel ship. Did they kill him? Did he get out somehow? Is he still there? God knows. Next on the list is a character that is very famous and very near and dear to our hatred, and of course I'm talking about Erebus, the Dark Apostle Wordbearer and the reason for everything. Now, as you probably know, the Horus Heresy never would have happened if Erebus had simply not existed, because it was him who never gave up his allegiance to the Dark Gods that he cultivated when he was a child back on Colchis, and it was him who tricked Horus into embracing chaos, and him who stole and supplied the athame that would wound him, which allowed him to be turned, as well as orchestrating many other things, and goading Abaddon into becoming the despoiler he would eventually become, as we learn in the End and the Death books. So, what has he been doing now? Well, as far as we know, he has been on the Wordbearer's planet in the Eye of Terror called Sikaris, where he serves as a member of the ruling council, since Lorgar is in absentia, having spent 10,000 years in meditation. And it is known that he constantly squabbles with and jockeys for power against Lorgar's adoptive father, Khor Pharon, who is also a notable leader of the Legion. Now, Khor Pharon himself has sort of returned to the setting to a degree. He was an antagonist in the book Throne of Light, which is from the Dawn of Fire series, and hints at the return of Starchild. Now, Khor Pharon is really interesting as a character, and I'd say I actually like him, maybe not as much as Erebus directly, but still pretty close, because Erebus has such a great personality to him. He's so vicious, so hard to read, so changeable and shifting in his plans and what he's gonna do next. You really can't predict this guy at all. And sure, that's led to some very, very stupid plot points happening, hint freaking hint, but it can't be denied, he is a legendary character in the setting. And with the Wordbearers making more moves, you know, with the return of Khor Pharon, I believe it would only be right that we get to see Erebus, learn about what he's been doing, hear his thoughts on things, the galaxy as it is now, and see what he comes up with next. Because he is, in effect, the perfect villain for the setting. That dark kingmaker who pulls the strings, and I think he could really shake things up if he was brought back. Next on the list is a member of the Sons of Horus, well, former Sons of Horus, now the Black Legion, and that is Falkus Kibre, one of the Justaeran elite, and one of the few people who Abaddon was close to. That's the big kicker here, the fact that he and Abaddon were close. To recap, Falkus Kibre would join the Justaeran elite of the Sons of Horus after the death of Tarak Torgadon on Istvan III and the presumed death of Garviel Loken. Now, the problem with this was the fact that he was very close to Abaddon, described as being, quote, Abaddon's man in all things, effectively his yes man. And this tilted the Mournival in favor of Abaddon, and was one of the factors that would lead to his unrivaled ascendancy in the Legion. He would basically be present throughout the entire heresy, and would fall during the Siege of Terra to Nathaniel Guerra, when the Justaeran tried to invade some tunnels below the Imperial Palace that had opened up because of seismic activity. It turned out to be a massive trap. However, even though he dies, he still comes back. Like in the 2014 book The Talon of Horus by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, he's still alive and active in the Eye of Terror, so somehow he came back from the dead. Why him and not someone like Horus Aximand or anybody else who died? I don't know, but he's back and he's alive, and apparently he's a possessed space marine now. But he is very much in control of his faculties, so he is still a viable, interesting character. And speaking on what happened in the Eye of Terror after the siege, he personally is the reason the Black Legion exists, because it only came into being after a few space marines, that being Falkus Kibre, Iskandar Khayon, and the World Eater Eorvine Euchris, would go and search for Abaddon and the Vengeful Spirit, because the Emperor's children were getting out of hand, they were cloning Horus, they were coming down on everybody, and they wanted him to take charge and lead the Traitor Marines once again, taking up the mantle of War Master, and he would do so after some convincing. But it should be noted, Khayon gets a lot of the credit for this because he's the POV character in that book, but it was Kibre's idea. And as of the Arcs of Omen, he is one of Abaddon's closest lieutenants, still a member of the Justaeran elite, now called the Bringers of Despair, and undertaking actions against Dark Angel's successor chapters last we saw of him. So why bring him back? Well, bringing him back would give a vehicle to also bringing Abaddon back into the setting, as a proper character as opposed to just a plot device, because he was a really interesting character across the Heresy and in Bowden's Black Legion books. So, Kibre would not just bring him back, but also give a way to humanize him, someone he has known for 10,000 years and who he was always close to. And as with all things, how does he feel about the galaxy? How does he feel about the 12 failed Black Crusades? How does he feel about the Great Rift? What does he know that other characters would not know? Because seeing him serve as Abaddon's personal confidant, and possibly second in command, would be so cool. And again, it's something I would really like to see. Next on the list is an Alpha Legion character, and of course I'm talking about Kassar, who is a Heresy-era Marine, but not one who appears in the Horus Heresy. Now, Kassar is the leader of a warband called the Unsung, who were trapped on a planet in a warp storm for the past 10,000 years, and as such, didn't really feel it all that much. So they're not that old, but they do have some experience because they were fighting other traitor Marines, namely Emperor's children, throughout the time that they at least experienced in the warp storm. So, they have a unique perspective on the galaxy. I've talked about these guys quite a bit, and they feature in the book Shroud of Night by Andy Clark, a book that a lot of people want a sequel to and that Andy Clark has suggested he would like to get to at some point in the future. Now, the thing with Kassar is the fact that his plot is left on a dangling thread with a lot going on, hence why people want him back so badly, because he basically left an Imperial planet with a beacon, that being a human who was glowing like a mini Astronomicon, and after having finally given himself over to the demon sword that was constantly trying to tempt him, he finally agrees, okay, we'll do things your way, and he does so in order to save what remains of his warband. He does it for his brothers. There's a lot of interesting care between them, and they have some really cool dynamics. So, bringing Kassar back would obviously bring them back because he was on his way out of the planet with this beacon about to be pursued by the Emperor's Children leader, who he had double-crossed because the Emperor's Children leader had double-crossed him. So, we would get Kassar back, we would find out what's going on with the beacon, we would get to continue his story with that demon blade, we would see where they go from there, and we would finally learn their true loyalties, because even though they are traitors, they're more like neutral. They don't really care for the Imperium as it is, but they have been thoroughly backstabbed by the traitor cause. They only care about each other and doing what they can to survive as a group. So I think many people would agree with me that bringing Kassar back would help flesh out the Alpha Legion in the 41st millennium, which has sort of been happening ever since the release of the book Harrowmaster by Mike Brooks back in 2023. And furthermore, he's actually mentioned in that book, wherein Solomon Akura, a new traitor space marine, is gathering up as many Alpha Legion warbands and groups as he can to sort of rebuild the Legion in some capacity, and he's a traitor through and through. But he actually contacted the Unsung, and all we know is that Kassar and his guys told him to, quote, eat the ends of their bolters. So again, very interesting, and it would be really cool to see how he interacts with other elements of the Alpha Legion, especially given what he said to Akura. Now, last on the list realistically should be a member of the Death Guard, so I can have one from every Legion. However, I sadly couldn't find one, because the Death Guard has really been hurting for good characters post-Heresy. You see, the entire screen time of the Legion during the Heresy was dominated by the dynamic between Mortarion and Typhus, and since Typhus is still active in the story, you can't really bring him back. He never really left. Furthermore, there just weren't that many great characters aside from them, because oftentimes Traitor Death Guard were just blasé characters who are like, we must praise the Grandfather Nurgle, blah, and we would get introduced to some very feared and powerful Death Guard lord only to have them killed by Sigismund or whoever else. Hell, even the Death Guard lords who were invading the Tau Empire and had to be stopped by Shadow Sun did not survive that encounter. So, in an act of absolutely flawless irony, Death Guard characters just don't live that long. There is, however, one exception, that being the character of Vorx, who is the leader of a warband called the Lords of Silence and is the starring character of a book by the same name. And yeah, Vorx is cool, and his story ends off with him having effectively taken over the homeworld of the White Consul Space Marine chapter, but he's conflicted by the end of it whether or not he should join Mortarion's call to invade Ultramar or stay on this new plague planet that he's making. But the Plague Wars are over by now, and Mortarion is gone, so what is there really for him to do? The Death Guard aren't really making moves anymore, they've kind of been shelved in the story for the time being. They lost the Plague Wars, they seem to be driven out of the Tau Empire, so what's he doing? All we can really see is him sitting on the planet, or just leaving to go back to where the rest of his legion is. There isn't that much there. And that's a similar problem with another character who could come back, that being Ignatius Grolgor, the now Demon Prince of Chaos who was the first Plague Marine, all the way back during what happened on Istvan III. He tried and failed to kill Nathaniel Garrow, but in doing so, became the first Plague Marine. And as far as we know, he is still alive and active. But what would that really solve? He has no connection to anyone, he never really showed any interesting characterization. Demon Princes tend to not be very cool characters because they're powerful but they don't have much of a personality. If he showed up, he would just be a big monster, and only interesting in name, just because he's Ignatius Grolgor. And I think this is emblematic of a bigger problem in not just the Death Guard but 40k. When you have very big charismatic characters like Mortarion and Typhus, they suck up so much of the story, and everyone else kind of falls to the wayside. I'm glad that the Ultramarines haven't had this problem as much, and I will get into that in a future video, but still, it's something that really needs to be fixed about the Death Guard. They need better characters. But what do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me when I say that we do need better Death Guard characters, or do you think they can be kind of shelved for a little while now after the Plague Wars? Do you guys think there are other characters I should have mentioned that you really would like to see back? Do you guys think some of the characters I mentioned are maybe better left to the annals of 40k history? I would love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video. Now, for anyone still watching, time for a bit of a personal acknowledgement, and I'm sorry if this is out of place or otherwise out of sorts. If people don't like me doing this, please let me know and I'll stop. But as many people know, I don't have a Patreon for this account, nor do I have the channel monetized. The whole year I've done this, I've done it for free, out of my love for 40k. However, as many people will also know, I, very simply put, live in a pretty abusive and unpleasant home situation. So I plan to, in the span of less than 2 years, run away from home, yes, literally run away, and start a new life, with my end goal of eventually moving to Germany. So to that effect, I would, at some point, when I feel safe enough and can hide it from my parents properly, yes, my situation is very difficult, I can't really open a PO box, and they have my bank account information, but I'll try to figure something out, start a Patreon if I can't get monetized for the channel, hoping that I can build up some money to help me when I leave. I know this might constitute e-begging, but sadly, there's just not that much I can offer in terms of benefits for a server, except a genuine ask for help from my audience. As such, when that goes live, I hope you guys understand and are willing to help me out.